What's going on, everybody? My name is Trendkill, and welcome back to Know Your Enemy. So if you're new to this series, this is a slightly different take on a God Guide type video. In each episode, we take a look at a specific god. We then give you tips on how to play against that god, should you happen to find that god on the enemy team. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing Cabrakan, the Destroyer of Mountains. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the graph of Cabrakan. Now, if you've watched this series before, yes, this is an oddly shaped graph, but you'll know that this graph resembles very closely the graph of Emir. Both are very high in control, both are very high in defense, and both are mediocre everywhere else. If we compare the graphs, you'll see that Cabrakan falls a little bit in control and defense to Emir, but gains a little bit in mobility. Now, obviously, because healing is 0 means he does not have a heal of any kind, and just like the Emir graph, I think the damage could be potentially a little low because Cabrakan and Emir both can be very bursty gods if built damage. However, they're probably so low on damage because you're very rarely going to see them built damage. However, Cabrakan and Emir are my two favorite guardians to build damage on. So anyway, let's go ahead and move into the ability so we can see why his graph looks the way it does. So first off, his passive Shadow Zone, this is just a flat 5% damage reduction for him and all of his allies that are around him. So instantly in a team fight, you are at a 5% damage disadvantage if Cabrakan is on the other team. His first ability, Seismic Crush, is a very interesting ability. This is his initiation ability and or his escape ability. This is why he's got a little more mobility than Emir does. Essentially, once Cabrakan activates this ability, it lasts for 5 seconds. During that 5 seconds, he gets a movement speed increase of up to 35%, and anytime in that 5 seconds, his first successful basic attack will stun the person that it hits for 1 second. In addition to that, he is immune to slows and roots while this ability is active. So with the 35% movement increase and the immunity to slows and roots, this is like a mini sprint. Sprint gives you 40% movement speed for 6 seconds and immunity to slows, whereas Seismic Crush gives you movement speed of 35% for 5 seconds, the immunity to slows, but it also gives you immunity to roots. So while it's a little bit slower and a little bit shorter, you do get that additional root immunity. Now the downfall to Seismic Crush is, if you use this to get away or get out of something that Sprint would have gotten you out of, you can't use this offensively to stun somebody. His second ability is called Refraction Shield, and this ability comes with a passive bonus protections. At max rank, you get 8 protections per stack up to 5 stacks, or a total of 40 protections. So at max rank, Cabrakan has the ability to have 40 free protections and a 5% damage decrease from his passive, making him innately tanky. Now the active portion of this ability is just going to do damage unless you have max stacks from the passive, in which case Cabrakan has yet another stun. So if you have all 5 stacks of your passive from Refraction Shield and then you activate Refraction Shield to attack an enemy, they will again be stunned for 1.5 seconds. And then we get into what I think is one of his best flavor abilities, Tremors. This ability is unlike any other ability in the game. Literally, he is the only person that has this type of ability. When Cabrakan activates Tremors, he has the option to channel this for up to 10 seconds. He can cancel out of it at any time during that 10 seconds, so if he activates it, he's not locked in for a 10-second channel. Essentially what he's doing is he's slamming his hands on the ground, and in an area around him creates a new type of crowd control called Tremble. If you know anything about Poseidon and or Bacchus, which we haven't covered in this series yet, this ability is kind of like a mix between Bacchus's Intoxicate and Poseidon's Whirlpool. The ability is constantly pulling you towards the center, just like Whirlpool does. However, it also makes your character very hard to control, wobbling back and forth like Intoxicate does. If you do not have an escape move and you're trying to walk out of Tremors, this can be very disruptive and confusing for a new player. In addition to all of that, it also does damage every half second, so it can actually do a considerable amount of damage, especially if Cabrakan is building magic damage. And finally, his ultimate Tectonic Shift is a very interesting ability. This is similar to Emir's Wall or Thor's Wall. It basically brings up a player-deployed barrier. Unlike any other barrier in the game, this one is not a straight line. This one actually curves around and almost makes a cave of earth around somebody. Another unique feature of this ability in comparison to the other wall type abilities in the game is the fact that this one does damage in a cone shape in front of Cabrakan. Another unique feature of this ability is the fact that it doesn't bring up one specific wall, but many small walls. And all of those walls separately can be basic attack to destroy them. How many attacks does it take to destroy a wall depends on the level of the ability. At the first rank, it only takes 2 auto attacks to destroy a wall. At max rank, it takes 6 hits to destroy a wall, but Cabrakan himself can destroy his own walls with a single basic attack. So with all of that being said, you can really see how Ymir and Cabrakan are very similar gods. The reason Ymir is probably regarded as better than Cabrakan is because all of his crowd control can be used from a fairly safe distance, whereas Cabrakan's pretty much gotta be up in the fray to do any good for his team. Other than that, just like Ymir, every single ability that he has some sort of crowd control on it. They both have wall type abilities. They can both be very bursty if built damage. They are both very disruptive, and they are both innately pretty tanky. So let's move into the mechanics section and see if Ymir's tips are similar to Cabrakan's tips. So in the mechanics section, we're going to talk about some tips that may help you as you're playing against a Cabrakan. Now, as far as tips are concerned, there's not a lot in here that's going to blow your mind, but what I'm going to do is at least open your eyes to some of the things that you may see Cabrakan doing. Now, first off, let's talk about his Seismic Crush. Remember, this is his only mobility, so if he uses this to stun, Cabrakan cannot get away. Now, you as a player are going to have to decide whether or not it's smart to attack Cabrakan after he is immobile, simply because he is a tank, and you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to spend your time attacking the tank who's probably got a lot of protections built. However, do remember that this can be a very quick and dirty stun. The issue for Cabrakan is this stun is very predictable. He activates it and has to run towards you to basic attack you once. This makes this a very poor initiation, but just like Ymir, watch out for a Cabrakan with Blink. This puts him right in the fray and gives him the ability to use his Seismic Crush to get a stun, wait until he builds up his passive on Refraction Shield to use his 2 for another stun, and then can unload his Tectonic Shift Tremors combo, which we'll talk about in a second. So while Seismic Crush is fairly predictable for an initiation ability, it's got a lot of utility to it. Now, as far as Refraction Shield is concerned, there's not much to talk about with this ability. It's just a damage ability unless he's got his passive stack, then it's an extra stun. So I would treat this as if it is always a second stun and leave that up to a misplay from the other player if he doesn't utilize it as a second stun. His third ability, Tremors, again, very disruptive, but remember that if you are stuck in Tremors, you can jump out, you can dash out, you can teleport out, the Tremble can be cleansed with Purification Beads. There are a lot of ways to get out of his Tremors. This is very similar to Ymir's ultimate in the fact that it's a massive AoE around him, which slows you and kind of holds you in it, so if you think you can't get out of the Tremble, then just turn around and attack Cabrakan until you are able to get out. This is especially true for a Cabrakan who may be slightly low on health, because unlike Ymir's ultimate where it's going to explode into a massive AoE and you're on a timer, Cabrakan's damage is low damage over time. This gives you the opportunity or the ability to out-damage Tremors, and for new players, they may get locked into the fun of the ability and forget that they can cancel it to get away from you. Now, one thing about Tremors is, one, if you don't have some sort of escape, this can be absolutely devastating. It can be even more so if you see a Cabrakan who's not even building magic damage build Gem of Isolation. This is an item that you may see on a Cabrakan if his team is ahead. It gives him a lot more ability to control a team fight, because not only now does everything around him tremble, it also is slowed. The same thing can be said for a Cabrakan with Weakening or Enfeebling Curse. Cabrakan can run in, pop the curse, then throw down Tremors, and it is very, very hard to get out of that if you do not have an escape move. And finally, his ultimate ability, Tectonic Shift, again, just like Tremors, very, very strong against people that do not have a jump or a teleport. Even if you have a dash, Tectonic Shift can be devastating. Now let's talk about the big difference between Tectonic Shift and the other walls in the game. If Ymir walls you in lane, you can simply run left or right around that wall. If Cabrakan walls you in lane, it creates a cave shape around you, and not only are you forced to run left or right around the wall, but you first have to come back towards his team to get around those edges. So if you don't have a jump or a teleport, the last thing that you want to do is run back towards the enemy team to get around the wall. Now usually walls aren't so bad if you have a dash, because the dash at least gives you enough mobility to kind of juke somebody. However, there's only one way out of Cabrakan's ultimate, and that is back towards the enemy team. So even if you have a dash, there's only one direction you can go, and the enemy team knows that. So let's talk about his Tectonic Shift combo. First off, he's going to drop his walls down to stop you from moving. He then has the opportunity to stun you in one of two ways. If he has his passive up, he can stun you again, and then he's likely to drop down Tremors while you're stuck in that cave. So now, not only are you stuck in that cave shape of walls, you've also been stunned for 2 seconds, and you're finally trembling, so you can't get around as easily as you could otherwise. Now, all of this is not even including the fact that he could have Gem of Isolation and or Weakening or Enfeebling Curse to slow you even more. So Cabrakan really shines against enemies with no escape. However, obviously in Smite, enemies with escapes are prioritized above those without, which is why in my mind Cabrakan falls a little short of most of the other Guardians in the game. So that about sums up Cabrakan. Hopefully you learned a little bit about how to play him. You can see that he's kind of Ymir light. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and if you come back and check us out next week, we're going to be discussing Loki, the trickster god.